So good evening, everyone, or good afternoon, good morning from wherever you're joining us. I'm Dr. Pritha. I'm the Assistant Program Director for FACO Development, Alcon India. We have with us here today Dr. Gaurav Luthra, who is a world-renowned surgeon, and he's a regularly invited faculty at most international meetings, including but not limited to the ASCRS, ESCRS, American Academy, APAO, APACRS, and World Ophthalmology Congresses, to name a few. Dr. Gaurav Luthra is an alumnus of the Maulana Azad Medical College, New Delhi, and at present he is a director and chief of cataract and refractive surgery at Drishti Eye Institute, Dehradun. Has also performed successfully over 120 live surgery workshops demonstrating latest cataract and refractive surgical techniques around the world, and he has presented over 135 papers and lectures in international and national conferences um, over the years. Sir is also served as a chief organizer of the Tech Skill Transfer courses at the AIOS since 2015. We're honored to have you with us here today, Dr. Gaurav. Thank you so much for taking out the time and sharing your vast experience and immense expertise with our participants here today.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure, and I look forward to teaching. I enjoy that, so I hope I'll be able to.
Sir, we're not able to hear you.
Okay, one moment. Are you able to hear me now? According to me, the mic is on. Can you hear me?
So we can't hear you.
No?
Yeah, ma'am, I think we can hear him. Is it some issue at your end? Because I can hear him.
Okay, sir. So thank you. We can hear you now, sir.
You
Perfect,
can?
sir.
Yeah,
Perfect.
yeah. We can hear you.
Thanks.
So before I hand over the session to Dr. Gaurav, just a little, just some instructions to all the participants. Please drop in your questions if at all you have any in the Q&A panel below, and so we'll address them at the end of the session or in between, as in when time permits. Also, towards the end, we will be having a feedback poll, so please feel free to give us your feedback. It will really help us in improving the session better. So without further ado, sir, I would like to hand over the session to you. So would we like to start with the poll?
Yeah, exactly. I thought, doing the poll in the beginning would be nice. So can you have those two questions that we, plan to poll the audience to understand their preferences? You can't hear me, right? I think she can't hear me, is it?
Hello?
I'm audible to everybody else, is it?
Yeah, sir.
I think
hear
she's
you.
not getting the audio feedback from here. Can you message her to request that we can do the poll? So welcome to this session, everyone. I'm really excited to be with all of you. And, before I start, I just wanted to understand two things, because this is what goes into the most basics of biometry. So I wanted to understand what you currently use for your keratometries for getting the K readings. Do you use a manual keratometer of one of the two kinds, the Javel Shorts or the Bausch & Lomb? Do you use the auto keratometer with the auto refractor? Are you using an optical biometer? Do you trust topography, or do you trust the Pentacam? So, you can choose one which you think you can't, which you enjoy using, which you use in your routine practice currently. Can we have them, have everybody take the poll, please? Maybe we can give 15, 20 seconds for people to decide. So it's choice 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever you prefer to use currently. That will help me understand better, what to emphasize on and how we can, improve upon what we are doing right now. So will we get the result right away? Okay. So I think, as expected, most people are using the manual keratometer and also the auto keratometer, which is fair. And some people are using the optical. So 37% people are using an optical. I'm really happy to see that, because that improves things, and correctly so. Lesser number of people use the topography and the Pentacam because they can only be additional to what we currently use. Great. Can we do the second question, please? So the question is basically aimed at what you are currently using for getting your axial length. So for your biometry, we've already done the keratometry. Now we want to do the axial length. Do you use the A-scan biometer with the contact probe? Do you use an optical biometer, or are you using the immersion ultrasound scan? what is your preference? So we have three choices here. What do you prefer to use? If you're doing ultrasonic excellent measurements, are you using the contact probe, which is choice A, or the optical biometry, or are you using the immersion scan? So if you can quickly put in your preferences, that will be really nice. So I think if most people have voted, in 5 seconds, we can see the result. Okay, so let's see. Okay, so I think again, excellent data here. Most people are doing immersion, many people are doing optical, and some people still use the contact, which I will talk about a little more as we go through, whether we can stay with that or we need to change. So I'll start off now. Is it okay if I share my screen?
Yes, sir. Please go ahead.
Sure. So I think I thought I'll share some biometry pearls. We are all good at biometry, I'm sure, since we are all doing cataract surgery, and we are all already doing everything what we should be doing. But I'm sure that there are certain things where things can be made better and better, and there's no end. I keep improving today on everything that I do as well. It's a constant learning process, so there's no end to what we can do. And so we've already done these two questions. Now I think the crux of the situation is that patient expectations have grown, and it's the era of refractive cataract surgery now. The patients are no longer satisfied with just getting their cataract surgery done and then having to wear glasses. They expect some kind of the refractive surgeon is the benchmark for the cataract surgeon. So cataract surgery is no longer just about removing the cataract. Our patients want to see well. They want to be less dependent on glasses. If possible, they want to see for near and distance and everything. So there, of course, comes the case selection for multifocal lenses as well, or maybe correction of astigmatism. So it's the era of laser precision and everything. And when a patient pays a premium, he wants to get a premium outcome. And I think the success with most of our premium IOLs today largely depends upon near perfect. So first and foremost thing that I would think of when I start doing premium IOLs or even conventional regular cataract surgery is to essentially first get as close to plano as you can, because residual refractive error is the primary cause for a dissatisfied premium IOL patient. And most importantly, precise and predictable preoperative measurements and an accurate biometry are the key to achieving near emmetropia and a satisfied, happy patient. Now, when do you get a refractive surprise? So a normal population has 66% of eyes within 1 diopter of emmetropia. And when Percival et al. Using ultrasound measurements and customized lens constants reported 97% of eyes achieving a refractive outcome within 1 diopter of target. So that was not bad, but today 1 diopter of error, a patient will come and probably come after you, like, why did I get this 1 diopter of error anyway? So for NHS, they consider if 85% of patients are within 1 diopter, they are happy. That was by Gale et al. And however, sometimes even a 0.5 may qualify as a surprise for some patients if proper counseling has not been done and right expectations have not been built. So in the era before optical biometry came about, in 1992, Olsen had reported that 54% refractive surprises were due to errors in axial length measurement, and 38% errors were because of wrong ELP or unexpected ELP, effective lens position, and 8% were only because of keratometry. Now, as optical biometry came in, and we started measuring our axial lens very, very accurately. So now, amongst the causes of refractive surprises, the most important cause actually became ELP, which was almost 36% of surprises, and errors in post-operative refraction, surprisingly, 27%. And axial length was no longer the most important thing. As you can see here, it's only 17% of surprises, and keratometry remains at about the same at about 10%. Initially, when optical biometry came in, keratometry was not its strongest point and it was not paid that much attention. Axial length was paid much more attention. Today, keratometry on optical biometers has come a long way. And today, I don't think keratometry will be a big cause for refractive surprises as well. And then you can see some of the other surprises which are less frequent. So what are the prerequisites for getting a good biometry? I think we start obviously with keratometry, and you should be measuring your cornea well, which would include magnitude of astigmatism, the axis of astigmatism, because if you're planning to go for a toric IOL, even if you're not planning to go for a toric, if you're planning to do something about the astigmatism, you would have to have the axis right. Then of course the axial length. Today we would love to have the AC depth because that would help us predict the effective lens position. And then the lens thickness. All optical biometers don't give this, but many ultrasonic biometers do this. So lens thickness is also important, and some of the good optical biometers do give you the lens thickness. So if you're looking at one, you should be looking at getting one which does your lens thickness as well. So effectively that could predict the effective lens position, and you can then get the lens thickness and the effective lens position both from the same device. Now, keratometry, this is how I learned how to do keratometry. And I was, of course, working on the Jawel Shiots and the Bausch & Lomb. I was way back in Guru Nanak Eye Center, 1995. And this is how 1992, actually. This is how I would do about 80 or 90 keratometries on our admission day, because I was posted in the, in the boss's room, and we had only 2 keratometers in the whole of that hospital at that time, and struggling with these keratometries, but they were pretty good. And you can still do a great job if you have a good calibrated keratometer. Of course, you need to calibrate it periodically. You can do excellent keratometry as well. So keratometry, I think precise keratometry is the key. You can see there are so many ways to do the keratometry, and as we go along, I'll keep talking more and more about this. Now, this is the Bausch & Lomb type of keratometer, where you would want to ensure that if you're using this, use the same drum for both the measurements. So align the meridian and par with the horizontal left drum in the horizontal meridian. So you would do that, and then you could just make sure that your points are aligning as you're there. I'm sure all of you do this as anyway, and then you can rotate it and get the other drum. Now, when you start looking at manual keratometry, it has its strong points and it has its weak points as well. So if you're looking at the start looking at the steep, it may not be the most accurate. And so there can be a small question mark there. And this is not the strongest point of manual keratometry yet. If you don't have another option, this is of course good enough to proceed anyway. And if you pay meticulous attention, I'll talk about some of the reasons where you can get surprises with keratometry. Now, when you're looking at the axis of astigmatism, I think nothing beats a Placido topography device. Now, almost everybody would have access somewhere, but many people will not have access. And if your clinic doesn't have it, you are not kind of deprived of anything. Unless you are doing intensive toric IOL practice, this might become very, very important. But if you're doing standard cataract surgery or starting out your career, you may not have to actually invest into a topographer unless you start looking at more of refractive aspect of cataract surgery. So once you have the Placido device, you can see that the bow tie can be bisected into 2, and it can give you excellent axis of the steep meridian, but it's not great for doing the power difference map. So it will not be able to give you the magnitude of astigmatism correctly, as well as the other ways will do that. So each thing has its strong points. You can see that manual keratometers will be great for doing the power difference, but a Placido would be great. Now, there are devices now which can do both. So let's go on to that. When we're looking at sources of keratometry errors, I think so many places where you can try to improve upon things. If your eyepiece is not focused, especially if it's a multi-user place, if you have not been calibrating your unit, regularly, the patient fixation is not nice and patient is not paying attention or cannot fixate, you'll have to look around and see whether the patient is able to fixate. Ocular surface, I think this is so important. If we don't have a healthy ocular surface, if a patient has dry eye, or before the patient is taken up for keratometry, if somebody touched the cornea with something, use some eye drops, you did an NCT, there could be so many reasons that the ocular surface may not be healthy. So I think when we get a patient for biometry and has been advised one, the first thing they get done is to get their keratometries done and their optical biometries done. Otherwise, by the time patient has been through a dilated exam and few other things, ocular surface may be already poor and compromised. And if we've gone through examining the patient and we then decide to do biometry, we usually call them back next day or another day to do the biometry and repeat it. We might just do it that day, but then, we can always call back the patient. So that is why it's very important to pay attention to the ocular surface. And in fact, it's very important to look at the raw data. Even if you're using an optical biometer or a Virion device or a Pentacam, it's very important to look at the scans themselves. Don't just look at the numbers. For example, on my Lenstar, which I use, if I just take the printout of the numbers, I will miss what was actually there on the raw data. So you have to look at the images which it captures from where the cornea can be seen, and you can see whether all the dots on the scan are of good quality or not, and then only you should trust it. We'll go on and I'll show you some examples of how it can go wrong. You can have a droopy eyelid, so you can be careful about that. And of course, sometimes you have a pterygium, you could have an irregular cornea for some other reasons, you could have a corneal scar, which may throw your keratometry totally haywire. So I think all these things are very, very important to pay attention to when you're looking for a good, reliable keratometry. Autokeratometers, which are inbuilt with the auto refractors, are available in most clinics. And yes, when I started my practice, I did not have an optical biometer. I did have a manual keratometer. I would use both. I would use the manual keratometer and the autokeratometer on the autoref. Now, it's not the most reliable. It can give you fairly good magnitude of astigmatism, but it's not great or not very reliable for picking the correct steep meridian or the axis of the astigmatism. So for toric IOLs, it may not be the best device. Yet, if you don't have access to other things, and if you're combining manual keratometry with your autokeratometry and they're both consistent, you can still proceed safely with a toric IOL implantation as well, with a little bit of caution. So not bad to do it. In fact, even today, 10 years into the time that we have been doing optical biometry, our biometry scans carry the autokeratometer printouts stapled to it as well. I typically have 5 or 6 printouts all stapled together, which would include my optical biometer, my auto K. I would have the Virion printout attached to it, and I would have an eye trace and maybe a Placido from the Kerato Lenstar as well, which means I would have 4 or 5 readings of keratometry. So the idea is, if you can start with one device, but it's great to have 2 or 3 devices, and they are not necessarily all going to be very expensive. So if you have 2 or 3 devices in your clinic which can measure, it could even be 2 keratometers, it could be one autokeratometer as well. Have your keratometry from all 2-3 devices that you can in your clinic, and look at them for reliability and consistency of measurements. And if they are not, please go back and repeat them, see why they are not consistent. That's very important. Pediatric, we have this old handheld autokeratometer, and it's invaluable. I do a lot of pediatric cataract surgery. Now, this of course will not be great for the axis of astigmatism, because you might be holding the autokeratometer in a particular way, which may not be consistent with measuring the axis. But for getting an approximate idea of the magnitude of astigmatism, or using them for IOL calculation for average case, invaluable in pediatric patients, and especially if you're doing an EUA or even otherwise. So now, I think I did notice that almost 30 to 40% people are already on optical non-contact biometry. That's a great thing. Today, I feel if gradually you want to graduate to doing, getting more than 90% of your patients within the plus minus 0.5, you may not start with an optical biometer, but you should aspire to move to that whenever you can. So definitely keep it on your mind that when you're starting practice, you can start with a phaco machine and you can start with a good microscope, but within 2-3 years, as your cataract practice picks up, I would strongly suggest that think about investing, because that can make a tremendous difference to your visual, to your refractive outcomes, and the ease of use and the consistency with which you can get good results. So optical biometry devices do a very good job of getting the keratometry today. They've come a long way. I used the IOLMaster 500 long time back, moved on to the Lenstar about 8-10 years back. So Lenstar definitely has a very, very good K, and now the IOLMaster 700, which is there, and even the other devices, there are so many optical biometers. They're all great. Tomy makes an excellent optical biometer with source. There's one from Nidec, and there are a few others, and then there are even newer ones which have gone way beyond this. So they all do a good job now, but look at your optical biometer, how many points it is measuring, and there are newer advances as well. I trust the Lenstar because it does it in 2 zones, and it has almost 32 keratometry markers. The IOLMaster 500 was not as good. It had only 6 measurement points, but they've done a great job with the 700. It, I think, measures on 16 or 18 points, and it's much, much better. And I'll talk about that as well. So I think optical biometers are good because on one scan, within few seconds, you have almost 8 or 10 measurements, and I'll show you how that happens. So you get these points, and you have to look at each of these points. Now, sometimes if the ocular surface is not good, you'll see that few of these points. For example, if there was a patch of dry eye here, these measurements may go wrong, and it can totally throw your astigmatism off the cuff. So it's good to look at this, on your screen and see whether you got a good scan or not. And so I think going on, I think measuring preoperative corneal astigmatism, you need to have multi-point keratometry. That always helps. The more the points, the better it is. So when we were looking at the older technology of the 500, there would be sometimes, because only 6 points were measured, you would be having doubtful measurements on these devices. Somehow the LenStar got better on that. So you started getting very good results. And now the 700 has taken it one point ahead. Now this is the telecentric keratometry, which is there on the 700. Essentially what it means is that when you're moving the IOLMaster machine backwards and forwards, you can actually, normally what would happen on a conventional keratometer is that these points would change. The constant spot distance is not maintained on those devices, but with the 700, you can see that, as you're moving it backwards and forwards, while it is focusing on it, the distance between the points will not change. So this is basically the concept of the telecentric keratometry. Whereas, as you can see here, the distance is changing as you're bringing it backwards and forwards. So this has been improved upon on the newer keratometers, and definitely should be kept in mind when you're investing into a new keratometer. It does make some difference to your keratometries. And then the concept of total keratometry today, because I'm sure you are all looking at total keratometry and Barrett's TK formulas, which essentially is so total keratometry is derived from the corneal power assessment, and it considers the corneal thickness and the posterior corneal curvature in addition to the anterior corneal curvature measurement. So it basically takes all three things into its this thing into purview, and then after that it gives you the corneal powers based on that. And these corneal powers which are produced, the TKs, can be used essentially on most of your formulas, and they can be replaced on the current formulas which we use for our ALPA calculations, including the Barrett's and the SRKT and the Hill RBF. And this is how it works. So it can work with all these formulas over here on the right, and can be replaced. Now, whether everybody is using total K or not is totally a different subject. Of late, what I've understood is that most people who do have access to total K don't use it regularly on all their routine cases at all. They would probably fall back on this only in their post-refractive surgery or those corneas which have been previously operated upon. So total K is great, but it's still developing. It's a concept which is still coming up, and the users who do use it, I am using it, mean that in their routine. So please use standard Ks and standard K printing devices, and that works pretty well. So measuring preoperative corneal astigmatism for toric IOLs. Now, when we switch from just doing routine cataract surgery to toric IOLs, you have to, as you understand, you have to measure the orientation of the steep and the flat meridians and measure the power difference between the two meridians. And we have to avoid the mindset that for toric IOLs, simply getting a set of Ks is not going to work. You have to be very, very kind of cautious about how you're doing your keratometries, because all your success depends totally on how you're doing that. So going on, we can do different instruments and they produce different numbers, and what information can be used. So as I said before as well, multiple independent methods can be very useful for confirmatory purposes. And one key to success is developing a strategy for assigning primary and secondary roles, which means that you have to decide that, okay, for this particular measurement, this is going to be my mainstay, my main device, and the other devices that I use in my clinic maybe are going to be the secondary roles, which means they will only confirm my measurements. Now, looking here, there has to be a triangle of agreement. This slide is borrowed from Warren Hill because I really love this and I've requested him to share this. You can see here that for determining the steep meridian, as I already told you, topography maps are supposed to be the best. Now, I'm not saying that everybody should do this, but we can always aspire to graduate to these things. So a primary instrument for doing the steep meridian could be the axial power map from a topographer. And then you could have secondary devices, which could be the LenStar in my case, for example, or it could be the Pentacam. Now, these two devices would provide additional information and confirm your view. For example, you notice here that all three devices have consistency. This is giving a power of axis of 84. The LenStar gave an axis of 85, and the Pentacam gave 83. So you're happy because now you know that we are not going off. Now, suppose you don't have these three devices, you don't have to worry. Maybe you have a LenStar, or you have an IOLMaster, or you have some other way of keratometry. You trust that for your axis, and then you have two other devices in your clinic, maybe an autokeratometer or something else, and you see whether that is giving almost the same axis. If they are giving the same axis, you're at peace, you can proceed with the surgery. if they are giving totally wrong or totally different measurements in the axes, obviously you will immediately stop and you will go back and try to see where you went wrong. And till you get consistency, I don't think you should proceed, or then abandon the thought of doing a toric IOL. Similarly, this was for the axis. Now coming on to the magnitude of astigmatism, you can choose again which device. As we always said that for the axis, it's the topographer, which ideally should be the primary device. But for magnitude of astigmatism, it can be your optical biometer with high density keratometry. And for example, here it's giving you 1 diopter of astigmatism at 85. And then you have a couple of other devices in your clinic which could also measure the keratometry. For example, if you have an eye trace or some other device, it is also giving us 0.97 at 90 degrees. So fairly good consistency. And then you have a third device. So this is now giving you 0.96 at 91. They're all consistent. So essentially what this means is that when you proceed with your surgery, don't just blindly follow what one of your devices has said and go ahead and, especially if you're going to do a premium IOL or a toric or a multifocal, don't jump or don't be totally dependent upon just one device which is giving you all these keratometry measurements. Try to have at least 2 devices if possible, and it would be great to have 3 devices and look for consistency amongst them. So that was keratometry. Now coming on to the second most important, and I think something which we have actually been able to do a great job with, axial length measurements. And this is again the second key to getting your biometries right. And of course, you could do the ultrasonic applanation with the contact probe. You could do the immersion, which we did for many years before we moved on to the optical biometers. And believe me, immersion does an excellent job. If you don't have an optical biometer and you are doing immersion, I think immersion gives you almost as good results as the optical biometer as well. So applanation, somehow I saw that some people still use that. I would strongly discourage you. Almost all A scans today come equipped with immersion. Yes, it is a little cumbersome probably to begin with, but I'll tell you what it does. If you're doing contact A scan, you can go wrong significantly. Here you can see that even in the most experienced hands, some compression of the cornea is unavoidable, even with the best of those devices. I know that Sonomed and some other devices, they come with those anti-compression things, and I've used those in the past. But I'll tell you what, when I started off my career, somewhere way back in 98, of course, I had a Humphrey A scan, which, at that point did not come with the immersion option in India here. And I remember Warren Hill giving me the Prager shell way back in 2002, and I brought it back. But take away that a lot of objectivity. So you're not actually compressing the cornea. And as you can see, that this compression can be from 0.14 to 0.28 millimeters in the best of hands. Now, this is not acceptable. If you're getting your axial length wrong by 0.14 to 0.28, you can imagine the kind of surprise you can get. For example, in long eyes with a staphyloma or in short eyes, just a 1 millimeter error in axial length could give you almost 2.5 diopters of surprise. So 5 basic limitations of applanation A-scan biometry are varial corneal compression, broad sound beam with precise localization, limited resolution, incorrect assumptions regarding the sound velocity. So also the sound velocity, you will not be sure because we are all using all the assumptions, and there is a potential for incorrect measurement distance as well. No, immersion biometry, I was trying to look for a very nice video which I had, and I wanted to share that, but unfortunately I couldn't find that immersion scan, but it's available, of course, on YouTube, and you should see that. Almost all good A scans today, they come with immersion scans, and they come with, you could use some of them actually come with disposable immersion small pieces as well. And, of course, it requires the patient to be more cooperative, and the patient can be asked to lie down, and it can be a little messy for the patient because the BSS may flow out. Yet, because the contact scan, the probe does not contact the cornea, it is so much more reliable for this thing. And it can, once your assistant is trained on it, you can actually delegate your biometry to your assistant as well, because the contact scan, you have to, when I was doing it, I was always do it myself, because I was, it was like developing a personalized A constant for how much compression you probably cause on the cornea. But the moment you switch to immersion and you have a good trained assistant to do it, you can delegate it, because usually there will be consistency and objectivity in the results of applanation in the ultrasonic immersion biometry. Now, looking at what comes out from the A-scan biometer once you've done an immersion, you can see here that you will have the spikes for the cornea. So these 2 spikes are for the cornea, and you can get a corneal thickness as well on some of the A scans. and then you'll have the scan for the anterior lens capsule and the posterior lens capsule. So you will have the lens thickness as well. You can see here that the lens thickness is pretty good. And this actually is useful because, in many of the newer formulas, having the correct AC depth and the lens thickness is very, very important if you want to do the ELP estimation, and new formulas would need that. And then of course, a spike over here, which is from the retina. And most importantly, this has to have from here a perfect 90 degrees takeoff from the baseline. So, in dense cataracts, you can use the higher gain as well. And beyond the retina, you can see the sclera and the orbital fat as well. So it's very important to understand these, and always very important that when you're doing an A scan, even if you're doing immersion, please look at these maps. Don't just go by the numbers generated, because it's very easy to miss the curves and the graphs and just go on to the numbers. And I would strongly recommend that you look at each of them yourself and make sure that if you're not comfortable with it, please repeat it. You can increase the gain, you can change the gates. I'll try to come to that later in the talk. So when the ultrasound beam is properly aligned with the center of the macula, patient can fixate on that on the probe, which usually has a small fixation light, and you have to ask the patient to do that. So all 5 spikes will be steeply rising and of maximum height. Now coming to the optical, why we made the switch from optical, from immersions and went on to optical. Now optical was devised by using immersion measurements. So the calibration of the optical biometers was done using the ultrasonic immersion scans, but it does bring a lot of consistency in your measurements. So this brings you to the tune of plus minus 0.02 millimeters or better, and it is the gold standard. And most devices which give you the optical biometry are consistent. So if you use 5 different devices, probably all of them will give you almost exactly the same axial length. They may not give you the same keratometries, but they will always almost give you the same axial length. The limitation, of course, remains with totally opaque cataracts, or sometimes with dense brunescent cataracts, which have some posterior subcapsular component. And then, of course, these posterior subcapsular or posterior polar cataracts as well. So the accuracy of axial length by different machines, look at this. This will help you understand why we have been moving towards optical biometry if we can. The applanation contact probe can go wrong by plus minus 0.24. That's an average. And immersion A scan just by 0.12 plus minus. And if you want to come to the optical biometers, just about 0.01 to 0.02. So there's a huge difference. And this, of course, translates into your accuracy of IL-PAR measurements and to the accuracy of postoperative outcomes as well. So when I say LensStar, this means optical because I use a LensStar, but then all these devices are really good. So it can give you all these measurements. It'll give you the pachymetry. It'll give you the anterior chamber depth. I use this a lot for my optical biometer and the pentacam measurements, because this can be used for your, as a cataract surgeon, you will probably want to do phakic lenses somewhere down the path of your career, the lens thickness, and then of course the axial length and the retinal thickness as well. And these are the spikes which are very, very similar to the, to the ultrasonic scans, and you have to look at these, and sometimes you need to look at these and change the gates as well to get the correct measurements, but 99% of the times they will get this. But it's good to have a look at these scans when you're doing the scans. Now, the other advantage is that when you do an ultrasonic biometry, you are basically looking at the theoretical optical axis, and you may miss the fovea, whereas in an optical biometer, it will almost always get the fovea. This becomes really important when you're doing a posterior staphyloma or a very high myope. At that point, it becomes very, very important. And sometimes, that's the only place where I've seen the optical biometers sometimes have some variation or standard deviation, but most other times it will not have many, differences in the axial length at least. Now, this is probably the third thing which we discussed about the effective lens position. This is after you've got the keratometry right and the axial length right. I think this is the third thing which makes a lot of difference to your outcome. And frankly, we still haven't mastered this. Even after all that we do, most formulas still use an estimation of where the lens is going to, finally sit. And it could vary from patient to patient, from eye to eye. And this is one of the major causes which remains of refractive surprises. Most of the modern formulas use the ELP in some one way or the other. And the Hill RBF, which is the artificial intelligence formula, does not use ELP, but it again depends upon ELP to decide, how to predict, because it kind of tries to, bring artificial intelligence into play to predict where the ELP is going to be and how that is going to impact your outcome. So ELP, a more posterior ELP would lead to a higher IL-PAR required for the same surgery, whereas a more anterior effective lens position Now, lens thickness can translate to an extent into ELP, but not completely, because even though you may have a thick lens, and depending on the lens design, you may have a lens which may sit posteriorly and it may be posteriorly angulated. So for different lenses, the ELP would be totally different. So I think this is another art which, but some of the new formulas, the Barrett's does a great job of, predicting the ELP, and I've been using the Barrett's and the Hill RBF of late. We'll come to that. So when we come to IL formulas, we had the first generation formulas, which were mostly based on the regression formulas developed by Sanders, Redzak, and Graf, known as the SRK formula. And it had its own shortcomings. I will not go into the details. It works very well for average eyes, but does not work well for the long and short eyes. Then it was modified, and the SRK2 came about, which could be used for short eyes shorter than 22.5 and longer than 24, and also uses the excellent in keratometry. We came to the third generation formulas. The SRK-T improved a lot for the long eyes, the very long eyes. The Holiday and the Holiday IL Consultant and the Holiday 2, which came later on in the fourth generation, Holiday worked very well for the 24 to 26 millimeter eyes as well. Hoffer Q was the mainstay for short eyes less than 22. It still is used a lot by many of us, but now the newer formulas have actually overcome, and they do a great job of the short eyes as well, and we'll look at that. Now, in the fourth generation formulas, we had the Holiday 2 and the Holiday IL Consultant, which was very popular 10 years back. And then the Haigis formula, and we lost Dr. Haigis maybe last year or a year or two back. And again, Haigis made quite a few changes to the formulas, and they started taking into depth the AC depth and the axial length and the keratometries, and did a great job. But now we have access to newer generation formulas. We have the Olsen, which came about a few years back. The Barrett's formula and the Barrett's suite, actually. Barrett's suite has the Barrett's Universal 2, it has the Barrett's TK, it has the Barrett's Toric Calculator, it has, a whole gamut, and they're all available on the ASCRS and the APSCRS website, and are incorporated into most of the optical, optical biometers today. Barrett's may not be possible to use very well with the ultrasonic biometry, but definitely on optical biometry, Barrett's works beautifully well. You can use immersion scans as well, and replicate that for your Barrett's formulas. The Warren Hills RBF, or the artificial intelligence formula, is based on pattern recognition. So it is not really a formula, and it's based on a huge number of eyes which were checked for 3 parameters: the axial length and the keratometry and the AC depth, and then of course the refractive outcomes of these patients. I was part of the beta testing for the Hale RBF formula in India, and this formula is available for free online on the rbfcalculator.com, and it is also integrated into the Lenstar, which I currently use, but not on the others. But you can feel free to use it on the free website, which is managed by Huckbait. I have no financial interest with any of these, but I love technology, so I'm talking about all the different things that we can do. So here, I think it's time for a small poll, because you must be bored by now with what we are doing. Let's go on to those 2-3 questions that we planned. Question here is, do you perform premium IOL surgeries, which, it's difficult to fix what are premium IOLs, but I thought that if you do multifocals, bifocals or trifocals, or you do torics only, or you have been doing both torics and multifocals and do toric multifocals as well, or you currently don't do any of these. So you're free to choose what you currently do, or that would help us understand again the second part of this lecture, which will focus a little more on how we can do toric planning and other stuff when we do our biometries. So please quickly chip in with your responses. Are you doing only multifocals for now, or are you doing both only torics for now, or are you doing both torics and multifocals, and maybe even the toric multifocals, or you're not doing any of these things? And it's okay if you're not doing any of these things. It all comes with time. So let's see what we got. Did we get the result there? Okay, so many of us, about 50% of us, are not currently offering any of these, and it's absolutely fine, because some of us may be starting our careers, as I was told, and others who've already been into it. So we do have good number of people doing torics. Almost 20% of us are doing torics. I actually think that we can have a much bigger number of people doing torics. It's very, very a good value addition to your practice, and even multifocals to an extent if you're careful. Let's go on to the next question. Our next question is, okay, so if you're doing toric IOLs, what is your cutoff for using a toric? Are you going to use a toric when you have astigmatism more than 1.5 diopters, or maybe over 1 diopter, or when you have it more than 0.5, and or maybe you look for using a toric in all your cataract surgery patients? That could be a fourth choice. Even if you don't worry about what is the astigmatism, by default you do a toric measurement for all your patients. So choice A is for more than 1.5 diopters, choice B more than 1, choice C more than 0.5, and choice 4, you are looking to put a toric in every patient if it is toric calculator is showing that. So let's see what we got. Okay, great. So most people would be happy to use a toric with, in fact, they're about equal. So 1.5 and 1 diopter. That means most people, almost 90% people would use over 1 diopter. And some people are bold enough to use it even for a 0.5. And for all cataract surgery patients, only one of us is trying to do that calculation. Let's see. I'll try to change your thought on this. Can we go on to the next question? What percentage of your patients are currently within plus minus half diopter of emmetropia, which means that how many of us are getting outcomes of plus minus 0.5 or better for our post-cataract surgery patients, which includes astigmatism and spherical? Are we getting that in less than 70% of our patients? Are we getting it from 70 to 80% of our patients? Are we doing it between 80 to 90% of our patients, or more than 90% of our patients are within plus minus half? So I think this will help us again understand the need for our biometries to probably go in a particular way. And so you have a choice 1, choice 2, choice 3. Let's see what we got. Great. So we have about 30% people who are still at below 70%. This would probably be the group who is doing the ultrasonic contact method or the immersion method. Those who have moved on to the immersion and the optical would be doing better and better. And I'm so happy to see that about more than 10% of us are doing over 90% of patients between. That's what we are all aiming for. We are all aiming for over 90%, and it's all achievable. I was able to achieve it, and I'll guide you how. Now let's go to the last question. I think we had one more, did we?
Yes, sir. The last question, I'm just launching it.
So which IL formulas do you prefer for your routine practice? Not formulas, but the formula. Like for your routine patients, would you use the SRK2 or the SRKT or the Holiday 1 or 2, the Olsen or the Barrett's Universal 2? Which is your favorite formula? The Hill RBF? So choose the one which you would use for majority of your patients or the majority of your practice. So let's see what we got. Okay, so good number of us are using the SRKT and the SRK2, and I see that quite a good number are using the Barrett's Universal 2. So I think I love using the Barrett's Universal 2 as well. And of course, but I can understand because I use the LENSAR, but many of us won't have that. But yes, you have that available free online as well, so you could use it. Great. I think let's go on. I believe some voice breaks in between. I was told that my voice is sometimes breaking. Is that so? If it happens again, please tell me. I'll try to see what I can do about my network. I don't want to disconnect right now. Is the voice okay at this time?
Yes, sir. It's perfect at this time.
Perfect. Great. So I'll go on with the rest of my presentation and try to understand how we can. Where did it go? Okay, there it is. Perfect. So I think our poll is over, and it was quite a big learning. So the Hill RBF is something which I worked on. This was the team which worked on the RBF. In India, we had 2 beta test centers. One was the Arvind Eye Institute in Madurai, and the other one was where we were providing basically data of our post-op outcomes, and that was used in making the Hill RBF from artificial intelligence. And this is how the RBF compared in the first set of 681 eyes. It was actually able to perform. It was a retrospective study at that point, and then a prospective one was done. It seemed to work quite well. Almost 96% eyes were within plus minus 0.5, and Barrett's was pretty close at 92%. So basically, it's an artificial intelligence-based formula. I'm not going to go into the details of how we got there, but initially it came on an Excel sheet. And essentially it tries to predict by looking at similar eyes, which means that when you feed your data of the keratometry, the axial length, the AC depth, and your refractive error or the post-refractive outcome, it tries to predict by looking for similar eyes from the past which have been studied. So for example, you fed in that your keratometry was 42, your axial length was 22.3, and your AC depth was this much, and your refractive outcome that you're aiming for is plano. It'll try to look in its database of say about few thousand eyes, like they had about 12,000 eyes in the HIL-RPF2, and it'll try to pick out those 40, 50 eyes with exactly identical measurements and see how they did with the PAR that was implanted. And it will try to predict what PAR will you use to get close to plano. So that's how it works. But then the shortcoming is that it still has a few eyes where the combination of these few parameters for certain eyes, it will not have in its database with enough numbers. So if you have an eye which is really short, for example, maybe it's a 19 millimeters, but it has a keratometry which is say 45 or 46, and that set of measurements is not there in enough numbers in the database of the HIL-RBF, it will tell you that it is out of bounds, which means it does not have enough eyes. So there you have a warning that this measurement may not be perfectly accurate. So that becomes good because it tells you whether it can predict. So it does great job of 95% of eyes, and about 5% or less eyes may not be predicted. So it does not depend on feeding the ALP essentially, but it uses that data to predict the outcome using previous eyes which have been operated. So in unprecedented cases, it is given as out of bounds. And when it shows green here, which is within bounds, then you know that you are good to go. And in most cases, Barrett's and HIL-RPF go neck to neck. I mean, if I use both on my measurements, as I'll show you, I get almost identical readings. So after it was initially conceived and a prospective accuracy trials were done, and that's where I wanted to share with you that how we can achieve more than 90% of our patients within plus minus half when we are using probably good optical biometry or good immersion scans, very good keratometry measurements, and the other data. So in the prospective cases, in the first lot, only 450 eyes were studied in this range of eyes. And I will not go into details, but we chose eyes between 39.59 keratometry to 48. And we were aiming for a plus minus half diopter of accuracy. 91% of these eyes were able to get into this target value, and it was a very good outcome. And when we looked at the eyes which were longer, which is from 22.5 to 25 millimeters axial length, we actually did better because we got almost 92% of eyes which were in the plus minus half, and 98.4% of the 62 eyes measuring greater than 25, which means for the very long eyes, more than 25. We had a great accuracy, but for the shorter eyes, I think we have data here for the shorter eyes, but this is a comparison of axial length less than 22.5, which is the shorter eyes. So the HIL-RBF did about 84.5. Holiday 2 was only at 52, 55.2. The Hoffer Q, as expected, did very well for the short eyes. Barrett's is almost comparable at about 80%. And the Olsen also is pretty good. So you can see the three formulas, which are the most modern formulas today, the HIL-RBF, the Barrett's, and the Olsen, which all did pretty well in the 80s. So that can go better than Hoffer Q if we are using these formulas. So today I would, if I was, using formulas, I would be using between the Barrett's and maybe HIL-RBF if I had access to it. And Olsen, frankly, I don't use much now. I was using it a few years back. Today, we have very good outcomes with Barrett's and HIL-RBF formulas. There are a couple of new formulas, the Super Ladas, the Ladas formula, and a couple of other formulas. In 2018, the HIL-RBF2 came about, which had a much larger database, as I said. It dramatically increased the range of the short and the long eyes up to 40 diopters of IL-PAR and up till -5. And now we had more than 12,000 eyes in the database with almost 1,000 eyes, which were with the short axial length and fewer out-of-bound eyes. And it's possible to aim for residual, which means that you don't have to aim only for a plano. If you're aiming for a -0.25 or a +0.25, you can feed that into the formula as well. And it also got a toric AL calculator integrated, which is again very similar to the Barrett's. So the Barrett's toric calculator and the Abulafia Cock calculator, which comes with the HIL-RBF, almost identical. There's no difference between the two. So it, as I said, it shows you some eyes which are out of bounds where the enough eyes are not available in the data. So going on, these are the different formulas which we can use and the requirements that they have. So if you look on top, the Haigis, the Hoffer Q, the SRKT, and the two, the Holiday 1, the Holiday 2, and the Olsen, you'll see that the Olsen needs much more data, which from all these things. And then of course, today, IL-PAR calculation has come a long way. We are here today, the newer formulas, the Barrett Universal 2, the HIL-RBF, and the Super Ladas, as I said. And this is how you would look at it. So you start from top. This is where we are at the bottom. So Hill RBF does a great job. Barrett's 2 and Hill RBF, as I said, are neck to neck, but in the very long eyes, Hill RBF and the Barrett's work extremely well. They work pretty well in the short eyes as well. If you look at Hoffer Q, it works very well for the short eyes, but not used for the long eyes. SRKT, as I told you, works very well for the longer eyes. And then, of course, you have these other formulas. So I think this is where we are. Barrett's is what you would probably choose for most of your eyes. And Hill RBF, as I said, I love to use it, and many people are beginning to use. The Hill RBF 3 is out any day now. And that will again increase the lot of things which can happen with the Hill RBF. So I think in our practice, what really changed our biometry and our outcomes, in 10 years back, our premium eye practice was just picking up. We were using the immersion scan with the autokeratometer, as you can see, and I was quite honest about that because we didn't have anything else at that point. We had a pentacam, but we didn't know how to use the case from there because they were totally unreliable. Today, we know how to use the pentacam for the case as well, especially for post-refractive surgery eyes. And about 85% of our patients within 1 diopter of emmetropia, we were working very hard. I used to do the biometry myself for all my patients, which was very time consuming. And only about 50% were within plus minus 0.5. Now, this was very disappointing. And today, when I look back, I wonder how I was doing that. And so our torics was just 2 to 3% of the practice, and multifocals had gone down. I used to do almost 10% multifocals about 15 years back. 10 years back, because of surprises and patients who were dissatisfied, we went down. And we lacked the confidence to promise spectacles independence to demanding patients. And this is when I started looking at optical biometry. I spoke to Dr. Naushad Shroff, who was one of the users in Delhi. There were just 1 or 2 IL masters available in Delhi at that time. And they came back that only 50% eyes can be measured, and they were using it only for their select patients. They were not using it for all their patients at that time. Today, almost everybody uses for all their patients, but they would use it mostly for their multifocals and torics. And they still relied mostly on ultrasonic immersion biometry for their routine practices. It was more time consuming. Somewhere in 2011, Ascaris, I was attending all the lectures because I was really interested in this. And I compared all the optical biometers available. And basically, because I was wanting to improve my toric outcomes and I loved the keratometry on the Lenstar, I went with that instead of the 500. And for that point, it was a very good decision. And trying to improve my torics and multifocal results further, I ordered the Lenstar. Now, we started by measuring. The good thing is when we bought this, we decided that we are not going to measure those select eyes. The idea was that we would measure all eyes, even those where the axial length could not be measured. So about 10 to 20% eyes, we would not get an axial length measurement. But frankly, because we got a great keratometry, we got great the AC depth, and we measured the fellow eye as well. So we would have great data of the 2 eyes, and we would just feed in the immersion scan axial length into the Lenstar, which the option is there, and it's there with all the machines. And because all the other measurements were so accurate and the immersion axial length was good, we started getting excellent results even with our mature cataracts or the dense cataracts. So that was the key in the beginning, that if you're doing optical, don't get discouraged for those eyes which you can't measure. Make sure that you're doing all the other measurements there on the optical feed of immersion and that. But it obviously does require tweaking your formulas because the standard optical A constants will not work. So you have to talk to your manufacturer and they can tweak it to give you the correct measurements. So in 6 months, we saw amazing results. From 50%, 80% of our eyes came to within plus minus 0.5. Our toric numbers literally doubled within no time. We were doing more multifocals. I was more confident. The best part is I stopped doing biometry myself over 6 months period because I realized that my assistants could be very, very predictable. They were doing as good as me. If I captured it and they captured it, we would get the same reading. So over a period of time, I stopped doing the biometry myself. And we improved our outcomes with the opaque cataracts as well. We got lesser refractive surprises. And I've already explained how we were doing that. Today, where do we stand? I was only doing 90% penetration with the Lenstar, but with the ILMaster 700, we have, it claims, and obviously with the swept source, it is possible to do this. Even I think the Tomy is a swept source, which does a great job. More than 99% cataracts, dense cataracts like these, which we can see here, can be penetrated by the newer optical biometers. So I think we've come a long way. And for our patients with astigmatism, this is what we currently do. I was telling you, I have 5 sheets attached on my biometry. That doesn't mean you have to do it. For each of you, you have to choose what you would like to do and what is available to you. But definitely, move on from having just one keratometry measuring device, have at least 2 or 3. They don't have to be the most expensive ones. They can be reasonably priced, but that helps you in kind of seeing for consistency and then deciding whether you're happy with your measurements or not. So this is what I choose today. Pentacam is only done for post-refractive surgery patients because we use the Holiday report, but otherwise because I use the Virion image guidance system and I love it. I've been using it for almost 7-8 years now. We also use the iTrace now, which is a recent acquisition. And the topography comes in from the Placido, which is on our Lenstar, but it can come from anywhere. We still do the autokeratometer because by default that's done for all the patients. And this is the T-cone which I use. And this gives you the Placido. And it also tells you about the consistency of your measurements, whether they are all matching up, tells you the standard deviation, and you should look at this. Now, this is the toric planner, which is available on all optical biometers. And you can quickly see whether, the Barrett's toric calculator can tell you whether, you're getting a measurement. You can move the aisle around, you can move your incision around, you can change the SIA, and you can see where you will get your best fit. I will not go into the details. It's meant for a talk on toric IOLs, but this is how I get my readings. And let me just show you what happens here. I hope my device works. Okay, so I wanted to just show you here. If you look here, the astigmatism is just about 0.94 at 2 degrees. And it is predicting a toric IOL of 225. So it's less than 1 diopter of astigmatism, and yet it's showing us a T4 kind of a measurement. And you can see here that this is also showing similar on this is the Barrett's calculator. This is the Hill RPF with the Abulafia Cock. You can see here that it's predicting an alpha of 21, and here also 21. And they're predicting almost identical here, both the calculators. And this is what we do. And here, this is another patient's eye. And somehow, for me, this is getting blocked by this window of the, let me see if I can remove this. Wait a minute. Okay, yeah. So here you'll probably see that it shows 2.64 diopters of astigmatism at 180. And here it is predicting. Now, what I wanted to show you here was, please ensure that the axis does not flip. Here we are getting a residual of 0.45 at 180, which is the axis at which the astigmatism was present, which is 180 here. Now, if we use a higher powered lens, we will have a flip in the axis. This is what you really want to avoid. So please don't get a flip in the axis. I would always go with a slight undercorrection if I had to. I would make other changes, but a flip in the axis is not great. So watch out. This shows at 91. This shows you at 180. Now going on and calculation. Now, I wanted to give you a certain caution in toric planning. Now, this was a patient where we thought we had everything going right. A 3.34 astigmatism at 15 degrees, and it showed us some calculations here. And when we did the T-cone, which is the Placido, it also showed us 3.6 at 180. So the axis was fine. The magnitude of astigmatism was consistent. All our devices were showing that everything is great to go. Now, we happen to look at the Placido of this patient, which comes on the T-cone. Now just look at this. Can you see the pattern? Now this pattern is something which you will not probably want to do. It's not going to be consistent. You can use a toric, but you must know that this is almost like a PMD. So there is the importance of screening your patients. Today, most people, most good surgeons will look at looking so consistent between devices. They are all telling you the same thing, but this will, this patient will not have a great outcome unless you've counseled them that you may be able to get some kind of correction. So this is something which I think all of us should be thinking about. Now, another example for toric planning, this patient has 2.64 at 180. And on the T-cone, he has 2.4 at 4 degrees. So they are quite consistent. So I'm fairly happy, just a difference of 0.2 in the magnitude. The axis is pretty consistent. So it shows almost identical, planning for the IOL here. They are both showing almost the same. So this patient has good consistency. Then I would look at the Virion. So you can see that the Virion is also showing about 2.5 at 6 degrees. So fairly consistent here. And then I would look at the iTrace, which again shows about 2.4 at 177. So when I look at this, these are the data which I get when I see a biometry patient. And I'm happy to see that all four are having almost identical axis, identical magnitude. I will not think about it further, and I will probably go with the planning for a toric IOL. Now looking at another example, here we have a patient who has just about 0.94 at 180 here. Same patient measured on the Placido has 1.83 at 8 degrees. So almost double the astigmatism. The axis looks almost the same, just 4 or 5 degrees between the two, but so much difference. Now this should be an alarm and you should start thinking what's going on. And that's why, as I said, the importance of having 2 or 3 devices. Now the Virion is showing us 1.4 at 164, and the iTrace is showing us a 1.5. So 3 devices are showing us about a 1.4 or a 1.5 at 180. One of them was showing just about 0.94. So these are the patients where you would want to go back and repeat the measurements next day, put them on some lubricating drops, call them back. Don't jump into a toric based on just one planning. And that's why the importance of not looking at just one way of planning your toric IOLs or your keratometries for doing the biometry. So when I do multifocus, again, all the same tests I would do, but here I use different formulas. Like for the PanOptix, I will use the Barrett's calculator. That gives me a good idea. I will probably calculate by default. We get calculated for other lenses as well, the fine vision, the 80 Lisa. So for torics, you have to have, like, you can have templates for trifocals, you can have templates for bifocals, and for torics, and your most optical biometers will quickly do this and make life very easy for you. You can choose the formulas and you can choose the lenses that you're planning to use. Now for my toric implantations and even for my routine surgery, I love to use a Virion, as I told you. Now, not necessary that everybody will have it, but yes, you can aspire to have one down the line in a few years. If you don't have it, it really, really helps. It takes out everything. It's beyond the scope of my talk, but I wanted to just share with you. Let me just make this stop. Sorry. Okay. So the IOL implantation becomes very easy with this image guidance system. So does the Rexis. Now, the reason why I wanted to show you this was that I've lost the cursor where I can move this. So anyway, why is it not visible? So you can see that there is a Rexis planner here. I don't know how to cue this. So anyway, I'm sure all of you have seen a number of videos of the Callisto and the Virion. I love the Virion, but Callisto is also available and they can be used. Now, when you don't have a Virion system, this is how I would do it. Almost all devices have the option of taking an anterior segment picture. This is from my Lenstar, but even autorefs can do it. And you will have the landmarks on the sclera or the conjunctiva, and you can see these landmarks. And if you have a good picture of the image of the eye, most of these devices will also have an option of putting this overlay of the axes. So once you have put this overlay, you can take a printout or you can take it on your iPad or your phone and carry this to your OT. You don't have to do the toric marking on those patients pre-op then, because you can see that, at, for example, here at 170 degrees, you have this vessel. At, say 40 degrees, you have another vessel, and you could look at some pigment. You could look at this pigment and see that this is probably there at about 160 or 170 degrees. And then you could mark these points on your table under the microscope. And then from there, you could derive the axis of IOL implantation. This is another way of doing toric IOLs without having to do marking with your bubble level marker or other things. But then you have to be very sure of what you're doing. Otherwise, you'll be stuck in the OT. A good quality image capture, see it beforehand. And if you have the option of put this overlay over it, even if your machine doesn't do it, you can still do this. Now here, the advantage is that the patient is in the sitting position. So there is no and have this overlay of the reticule put over there, and then you can use that for doing your toric IOL placement as well. So going on, I think we've talked enough about opaque media as well. And as I told you, it gave a lot of benefit to our practice. Some of the new biometers that we have today, the 700 that I spoke about, and it has really changed the game. And we are currently likely to have the iStar as well from the Haag-Streit panel. And there is the MS39 or whatever they call it, which is an amazing biometer as well, which does intersegment OCT. So the newer devices are going to integrate all these things. So I think the big thing about the IOLMaster 700 is that it can capture the fovea as well. And it's a swept source, so it can penetrate dense cataracts, and it has a telecentric keratometry. So I like all these things. I did do a demo of the 700 at that time when it was launched. It was missing on a few things, the formulas at that point. Today, they have almost everything going for them. So it provides all the parameters that you need. We spoke about all those things, the white to white, the keratometry, and for the markerless surgery as well. So you get, of course, fewer refractive surprises. And if you see that if you have the foveal pit over here, then you know that you got your measurement right. If you don't see it, you can go back to repeat your scan or find the reason why. You could be having an ERM, you could have something else. And again, of course, penetration through dense cataracts. And then you can have good workflow. Sometimes you can pick up pathologies on the scan. I didn't like this function too much because it was difficult to actually tell, but some people love it. And I think, of course, it adds some value to your biometers as well. And now I would like to finish my talk by going a little bit about post-refractive surgery patients. One of the most challenging situations, because we are doing big numbers of refractive surgery today, and all of us should be always on the watch out. Look for very flat case, very steep case. Make sure you're asking a history of the patient for any refractive surgery. Look for funny K readings. You will be, sometimes patients will not tell you they've forgotten about it. 20 years back, they did some refractive surgery. So there are several formulas today. The IL master comes with the Haigis L. The Shamas is a pretty good formula as well. I've used it. So what do I do today? I do these two things. This is the ASCRS calculator. And what it does is that you can, use, actually, I was hoping that this will magnify it, but it is not for some reason. So what I do today is on the LenStar, I will get the measurements and I will use the Barrett's True K, or I will use the Shama's formula. These two are available on the LenStar for me, and almost all biometers have their own formulas. The Barrett's suite also is there on the IL Master, which gives you. Now the ASCRS site and the APCRS site, they have the ASCRS calculator. It can take measurements. It can take lots of measurements from different machines, from the Atlas, from the Pentacam, from the OCT, from the OptiView, RTView OCT. It can take measurements, and all these put together, it can use different formulas to predict. So here you can see that it can, be predicting the Haigis L, the Hill formula, the OCT derived, the Pentacam derived, and the Barrett's True K, and all those measurements are visible to you. I would usually choose the one which shows you the highest predicted IL power. So here I would probably choose the 17.5 or the 17. And as you can see here also, LenStar is giving us about 17 and 17.5. So this works really well for both myopic and hyperopic RASIK. And even for RKIs, you have the formulas. This is what today I would use. Again, this is a topic for a full lecture, post-refractive surgery biometry, and I will not go into the details, but I wanted to share with you how I would pick case using the Pentacam for post-refractive surgery eyes, the EKR report. And you can see here that I would use the 4 or the 4.5 mm. And this is a very, very useful tool for those of us who have access to the Pentacam. Please do utilize this for using the measurement of the case from the area which matters, and put it into the ASCRS free calculator, which is available online, and you will likely get a fairly good outcome. So I think time for questions. And to summarize, the importance of accurate preoperative measurements cannot be underestimated. Proper attention to details and modern diagnostic tools have made biometry remarkably accurate. And if you don't have access to them for now, don't be discouraged. You can still do a great job and get at least 80 to 90% of your patients right, even with manual keratometry and immersion scans. You have to pay more attention to details because you cannot delegate it to assistants, but doing that, you can still manage to get similar outcomes to what you can get with optical biometers, and then aspire to move on to optical biometry. So I think I'll stop there. I had to leave out a few areas because as it is, the talk became very long, but I would love to answer all the questions. So I can see a lot of questions, and I have a list of questions already put up to me. So I'll just open that. I didn't get the time to put plan to do, but I will quickly take out those questions. So let's see. Okay, so what is okay, so we have, what is idea of dilated or undilated biometry? Okay, ideally do your biometry without dilation, because I've seen that on the optical biometers as well and others, it's important to have a small pupil to get better patient fixation. I would definitely do biometry on an undilated eye if possible. Only rarely, if you are not getting a cataract penetrated by the because of a dense cataract, you may put a drop to dilate, and then the biometer may sometimes capture it, but I would preferably not want to do it on a dilated pupil. It's more accurate with a small pupil or with an undilated pupil. Beyond what value of cylinders should the biometry be repeated? So I think there is no value of cylinders beyond which you should repeat. You have to look at consistency. And if your astigmatism is consistent between the various measurements. Now, if you don't have 2 or 3 devices, I wanted to share this. If you don't have 2 or 3 devices, don't be discouraged. All you need to do is take the measurements on different occasions, which means if you've planned a surgery in 2-3 days from now, do it today and call the patient again tomorrow and repeat the keratometry. Make sure that, on a virgin eye where patient has not used any drops, no pressure has been checked, no NCT, nothing, so on the same machine, you could still do it on 2 or 3 occasions and still get a fairly consistent, so that, you can look for any kind of deviation between what you got. And that would help. But definitely in very high cylinders, you have to be very careful, because you should be looking at possibility of a cornea which may be, having some form of fluorescein keratoconus. So in those eyes with very high cylinders, I would definitely suggest doing a Placido if possible. Otherwise, if you're planning a toric, you may have a surprise. So definitely check those more carefully. Can we take access of keratometry from topography and magnitude from autoref in toric cases? Yes, you can. So for making sure that your access is right, I would strongly suggest that use the topography and use the credit card test. So what you can do is, they typically say that on the screen where your topography printout, the axial map is there, use a card to bisect your bow tie, the upper part and the lower part. So where it bisects and you can see both sides as being equal is where your axis lies. Sometimes the topographer picks an axis which may not be correct. So don't go by the axis which the topographer is telling you. Choose it yourself. So you can, bisect the 2 lobes of the bow tie and choose the correct axis. And yes, you can still use the magnitude from the autokeratometer. It would not be the best, but still I would probably trust it a little more than what was coming on the topographer. But if they are both showing the same, nothing like it. Up to how many degrees of axis variation is acceptable, and which axis to take finally in a toric calculator. As I said, you have to give those primary and secondary roles to your different devices. For me, for the axis, I would depend on 3-4 machines to be showing me almost the same axis, but I would go with what the Placido was telling me. But if you're off by, usually most devices will show you off by 2, 3, 4 degrees, which is totally acceptable. If something is showing you off by more than 5 degrees or 10 degrees, you definitely need to look at it more carefully and then decide which device you're going to depend upon. So you have to gradually in your mind and with your results, try to decide which devices are going to work best for you. What about Tomy optical biometer? It's very good. I love it. I've used it for a couple of months. It is almost as good as the 700 and even better in some cases. It can capture very fast and workflows are very good. But you have to link it to a computer to get the proper good printouts. Otherwise, its own printer, somehow I was not very excited by the printouts which the Tomy optical biometer gives, but it does the job very well. It also has a Placido inbuilt into it. Can we manage astigmatism of 2 diopters without toric IOL and temporal SICS? Yes, you can. So somebody who's great with SICS, to my understanding, SICS can work well for correcting. There are various ways to do it. If you want to kind of steepen, you can put a tight suture. If you can, so, the consistency will not be there. You can do a temporal SICS and try to correct it, but you will not be sure of what you got left behind with. You may be left with 1, you may be left with 0.5 or so, you cannot promise a predictable result when you're doing that. I think even for example, changing your incision site for doing the steep meridian is not great. Ideally, you should stick, because SIA values have come down ever since we started using smaller incisions of say 2.2. Our SIA is usually in the range of 0.1 to 0.2. So moving the incision around as people would have done in the past would not be a great idea. Clear corneal opposing CCIs may still be a choice, but not a great choice. I do some femto LRIs because I do a lot of femto cataract surgery. So for my multifocals with astigmatism below 1, if I'm not planning to do it, for some reason, I would prefer to do it, but for astigmatism, I would still do an LRI on the laser, but not, I think there's nothing better than toric IOLs even for very small IOLs. So we measure toric calculation for patients, as I showed you, even with the 0.2 or 0.3 astigmatism, because of the posterior corneal astigmatism coming into play, and the Barrett's toric calculator, or even all the IOL calculators. The Alcon IOL calculator has integrated posterior corneal astigmatism. So they will always try to undercorrect or overcorrect, but depending on whether it's with the rule or against the rule. So you may have a patient with just 0.3 astigmatism, and it may predict you have to use a T3. And you may have another patient with almost 1 diopter of astigmatism, and it will tell you not to use anything. So that all depends on whether you're with the rule or against the rule. And you must do a toric calculation for all your patients for cataract surgery, and then decide whether you should. That way, our toric volumes are about Monofocal toric is about 35%, and another 20%, 10 to 20% for multifocal torics and LRI. So about 70% or 80% of our patients, we are correcting astigmatism in one way or the other. If we are using ILMaster 700 and Barrett's suite, does we need to cross-check result every with ASCRS online? If yes, why? Okay, so if you're using, if you're using the ILMaster 700, then you're probably wanting to use the TK form function, which is the total case. Total Ks are yet to be completely validated. So I would definitely not use that as like with my eyes closed. And Barrett's suite, yes, as I told you, Barrett's True K works really well for doing post-refractive surgery. But as you may have understood through the whole of my talk, don't rely on just one way of doing your measurements. If you have the option to do your measurements in 2 or 3 different ways, for example, even with the formulas now, I could easily put just Barrett's formula on my printout. But frankly, I put Barrett's, I put Hill RBF. If possible, I sometimes even put SRKT. If they show consistency, I'm happy to use it because I'm more confident. But if I'm using only one, and if I were to go wrong, I would definitely, regret later on. So if you have the choice of doing the ASCRS online, why I would still do the ASCRS online calculator when I was having the ILMaster 700 is because on the ASCRS calculator, I can feed in data from several devices, from the Pentacam, from the OCT, from the Atlas topographer if I have it, from various 3-4 from the optical biometer, and it will give you the 4 or 5 different formulas with the 4 or 5 different devices, and then you're free to choose it. So that's why I would still go to the ASCRS online calculator. If you're using 700 and Barrett's suite, does we need to cross-check with online Barrett's? No, you don't have to. Online Barrett's is available, but if you have inbuilt into your system, why would you want to use that? Is there, will there be any effect of IOL anatomy and mechanical properties on final? Yes, very much. So I think the design of the optics, the total length of the IOL, every IOL has its own A constant. For example, I remember one of the first designs which came from Zeiss, there was a lens, Lucia, which, would induce a hyperopic surprise in the first few days, and then gradually it would settle down. Because the IOL design, the posterior angulation, and the IOL geometry itself, whether the IOL has power put onto the anterior surface or the posterior surface or into the middle of the lens, would all determine the A constants and your final outcomes, and they can go wrong. So the A constants are constantly updated on the ULIP site for optical biometers, and then you have to develop your own personalized nomogram as well if you can. But if you're using one of the newer things, you don't have to do all that so much. If I use Barrett's 2, which A constant ideally I should enter, USB or optical? So that would depend on how you're measuring your axial length. If you're using ultrasonic, then you would have to enter the ultrasonic one, A constant. And if you're using optical, then you would feed the optical A constant. So depending on what you're using for your axial length measurements, typically the optical axial lengths are about 0.3 longer, I think 0.3 longer than the ultrasonic one. So that's why because it includes the retinal thickness into the measurement, which the immersion or the USB scans will not. That is why the difference in the A constants. Above what amount of astigmatism will you want to check the topography with T-cone? So for me, because I have a T-cone on my Lenstar, my staff does for all patients where we eventually decide to do a toric, we do a T-cone for sure, we repeat it. And it's not about what is the, in fact, for smaller amounts of astigmatism, it becomes even more important to have the axis right, because if you can go wrong more easily. When you have a high astigmatism, usually there will be good consistency between 2 or 3 different devices on the magnitude and the axis of astigmatism, unless you have something like a pterygium or a corneal scar or an irregular cornea. But it's where the astigmatism is really small, where you need to be more careful, because the deviation is so little that it may go wrong by 10, 20. If you're not consistent, your readings don't toric. What different magnitude machines will you want to repeat your measurements? And if a difference is present, you won't go ahead for torical. Definitely, as we discussed, I would, if there was no consistency between the magnitude, for example, if the magnitude in a 2.5 diopter astigmatism varies by 0.1 or 0.2 or 0.3, I will still be okay with it. I may not repeat it. But if the difference was more than 0.5, my model will change completely. And I will definitely want to repeat it maybe the next day and on the 2 or 3 devices available to me. And if the consistency, and I will try to look for the reason why I'm not getting consistency. I will probably do a Pentacam or a Placido, try to see why the cornea is not behaving. Is it the ocular surface which is not healthy? Sometimes if you have a poor ocular surface, you can start the patient on treatment. You can do a dry eye treatment, you can do a LipiFlow or the IPL kind of a treatment, call the patient back in a week or 2, Again, if a patient is a contact lens user, you have to always be careful. You have to ask. If sometimes patients use soft lenses. Recently, I had to operate on a patient who was keratoconus, who had been cross-linked long back and was using RGP lenses. And we did his measurements, and then we were trying to get a good outcome. We told the patient to come back in 3 weeks. Patient was initially not ready. When he came back, we had significantly different measurements for the keratometry. So I think contact lens is another thing where, if it's a soft contact lens, I would suggest a patient stay off for about a week at least. And if it's an RGP or a hard lens, then at least three to 4 weeks would be ideal if possible. If not, then at least 15 days. What is the reason for variations in IL-power of same eye in different formulas in optical? That's because all the formulas in optical biometry it said. So the question is that why is there a variation in the IL-power of the same eye using different formulas? That's because all the formulas use different ways of reaching the final outcome of the IL that they are predicting. Some of them use only the axial length and the keratometry. Some of them use the AC depth as well. Some of them use the ELP, and then they use their own predictions of the ELP. So they all have different things, and that is the whole idea why we have evolved so much and come to a situation where now the newer formulas have very good consistency between what they say. So if budget is a concern, shall we go to TOMI? Definitely, I think TOMI is a great biometer as well. And what I strongly suggest is before spending that money and buying a biometer, please call for a demo of the 2 or 3 biometers which are available. The companies are usually happy to do that. I did that for myself. They will be happy to put it in your clinic for a week or so, use it for all your patients and see what you are most comfortable with, and then buy that. It's not a good idea to go on somebody else's recommendation and buy. In non-ophthalmos eyes, if axial length is not listing in IOLMaster immersion technique, can we take B-scan? You can, B-scan axial length can be done, but in my experience, it invariably is not that accurate. But if you have nothing to work with, then you don't have a choice. Then you just have to depend upon that. But frankly, some of the mature cataracts, we used to tell our retina colleagues to, we would do the A scan, but we would tell the retina colleagues that when they're doing the B scan, can they please take the axial length? Invariably, I would find that even in the best of hands, there would be a significant difference between what the A scan got and what the B scan, and then you're in a dilemma of what to use. But if you have nothing else to work with, then you could try to do that. I don't think it will be very accurate. Is there any effect of post-surgical corneal edema for emmetropic state? Yes, definitely. So in the early days after surgery, your refractive error could be totally haywire if you have significant corneal edema, and then you have to allow it to settle down. Even your astigmatism could be totally wrong, and then because your incision is inducing some astigmatism initially, there may be incision edema, and that can induce some corneal astigmatism. So sometimes on day 1, day 2, you will not have, and if you call the patient back in a week's time, you will see a significant difference in the patients, and even retain viscoelastic behind the lens. So the ELP can change over a period of time, where the IL finally sits can change. So there can be, that is why we don't give glasses to patients right after surgery. We wait for 15 to 20 days because by that time, all these things have settled down, most of them. Patient with corneal opacity with astigmatism 2.5, would you suggest toric IOLs? Now, case to case basis, this is an art which you learn. I would not suggest doing that right away. So somebody wants to know whether with astigmatism and opacity and hyper-ISIN patient 30 diopters or simple monofocal and keep. So when in doubt, I would obviously tell you that go with a monofocal lens. But when you can get consistent readings and you have a placido, and even with a corneal opacity or even with a keratoconus, these are all special situations which you will learn over time. And yes, some of them can be effectively dealt with toric IOLs, and they do extremely well. Recently, I did one patient with an adherent glaucoma, and significant corneal scar. We had on all devices. We got a customized very high-powered ones, and really from 6 diopters of astigmatism, we could correct 4, and he's left with 2. He's very thankful. He's 6'18" unaided, and with about an acceptance of about 1 diopter of cylinder, he becomes about 6'9". So sometimes you can, if not. Okay, another very important thing, when you do torics, never promise a patient that you will bring him to 0 astigmatism, or when you're doing a multifocal, never promise to a patient, or even with a monofocal, never tell them that, okay, you will not need any glasses at all. And never do that. Never overpromise. always tell them that all that we are doing will try to bring you very close to zero, and we will try to bring you to a par which could be off by plus minus 0.25 or 0.5 in most cases. You will not be dependent on glasses, but obviously with a small par you may see much better. So ordinarily you will not need glasses, but for seeing well, for near, fine print, or even for distance, it can be improved upon. Never tell them that you will be able to bring them to zero. This is very important with even when you are doing the best biometry that you can. So sir, simulated K or central 3 mm data for keratometry to consider? Definitely. So when you look into it, as I was showing you on the Pentacam maps also, you have to look at the EKR report and try to see which, the central cornea is where you are looking for. You could use the 3 mm data, which tells you a lot, because some patients, when especially post-refractive surgery patients, you can go with the central 3 mm data, which is very, very useful. Otherwise, the 4 or 4.5 mm data is very good. That you can decide when you look at the holiday report on the Pentacam, but otherwise, if you don't have that, you can look at it from the topography as well. In pediatric cataract, how do you do biometry? So see, in small children, if they are old enough to sit on a machine, I would obviously want to do an optical biometry for sure, because I actually do toric IOLs for pediatric patients at beyond a particular age. It's recommended only beyond 8 to 9 years, but we have done a study where we've done torics for select group of children, and I'm not recommending that you should do it, but we've done a study which is up for publication between the ages of 5 to 8, and we found fairly good results. But corneal astigmatism is evolving up till the age of 8 years for sure. So please don't go ahead and do torics younger than 8 years. But biometry, definitely, as I told you, if you have a very small child, like I do pediatric cataract for about 2-3 months or 6 months old children as well. And there, under EUA or even with some amount of sedation, like oral sedation, you can get a good reading with the handheld keratometer. And we can do the, if you obviously can't do the optical scan, you can do the ultrasonic scan for those children under sedation, and it works. You have to, ideally you should do a biometry. I don't see any reason. If you have to do an EUA and do it in the OT, please do it, but don't avoid doing a biometry in pediatric cataracts. Sometimes autokeratometry shows about 0.5 astigmatism, but Barrett's toric calculator suggests toric IOLs. What to do? Exactly what I said. So it all depends upon whether your astigmatism is with the rule or against the rule. You have to be more aggressive with the against the rule astigmatism. So it will definitely try to correct that more, and you will be less aggressive with the rule astigmatism. So a Barrett's might show you a toric IOL for a 0.5, and I would strongly suggest that you do it if you're confident of your measurements. So if you're confident about the keratometry measurements from 2-3 devices, and the toric calculator is showing you to go ahead and use a toric, even if it is a T2 or a T3, I would still use it, and I'm telling you, you get a very happy patient. So, but before you start doing these, please do it for higher part astigmatism. Once you've done a few, 50 or 100 lenses with significant astigmatism, then only you should start coming down to the very small astigmatism. Don't jump to them straight, or you can burn your fingers. So EDOF IL, any change in calculation depends on which EDOF you're using, and I would, so different EDOFs come with different recommendations. So some of them would recommend to go for, depending on the dominant or the non-dominant eye, they might want you to do micro monovision, and maybe some of them might tell you to go for a 0.25 minus, because they may not have that effective depth of focus. Others may want you to aim for a plus 0.25. So depending on what lens you're using, the recommendations will change, whether you should aim for a 0.25 or a point myopia or a hyperopia outcome. In patients with corneal opacity, average K is advised to use. How to do that? Please explain. So average K basically means that you are, with a corneal opacity, you are taking your keratometry measurements, and you are taking the steep K and the flat K. And if you have consistent measurements, in the most formulas, if you're not doing a toric, you just have to feed the average K into the formula, because that's what it uses to do the IL par calculation. So you add the steep K to the flat K and divide by 2, and that's your average K. And no big science to that, and you can do that. In nanophthalmos eyes pre-surgery, axial length listed as 18 mm post-op after 1 month. So it's that pre-surgery, the axial length was 18 mm, and post 1 month, when they checked it in the pseudophakic mode, it came to 15.7. Now this has to be an error of measurement, either the second one or the first one. It cannot be that the axial length changed from 18 to 15.7, because this means that either the 18 mm was wrong or the 15.7 we are getting. Most likely the 15.7 in the pseudophakic mode is more likely to be accurate, and then obviously you'll have a big refractive surprise. So this has to be, depends on whether how it was done in the first place. Was it an optical measurement or it was an ultrasonic measurement? But there cannot be such a big change, because here, it can happen with silicone oil and stuff, but not in an eye which is a virgin eye. So I don't think that will happen. So any special consideration to take post-op after premium IOL implantation, toric and multifocal IOL? What do you suggest? First op, post-op day or 7th day, what will be better? So any special considerations to take post-op after premium IOL implantation? So I think post-op day 1, we all do see our patients, and if we have a clear cornea and a clear chamber and a patient is doing well, you'll get an approximate idea of how your outcome has been for both multifocals and torics. But frankly, on day 1, you may not have the best outcome available to you, and some patients may have some corneal edema, they may have some striate, they may have some wound-induced astigmatism. So definitely look at what your outcome was on day 1, but don't go totally by it. Some people for torics, they like to put in a little bit of dilation and check the IOL position few hours after surgery or the first day post-op to see whether the IOL has had any post-op rotation. So if your toric IOL is not on axis where you left it and you think it is significant and you're planning to rotate it, you can do it on the first day itself. In fact, 2-3 days back, there was Dr. Douglas Koch who was with in this biometry webinar, which was really nice. And he mentioned that he checks all his patients on post-op day 1 on the slit lamp. And if he finds that the toric IOL has moved, he tries to reposition them on the slit lamp. It looked very dangerous to me, and I won't do that. But for them, because going to the OT means a lot of cost, so they probably like to do it like that. But for us, it's very easy to take our patient to the OT and just dial it right then on the first day post-op. But frankly, this doesn't happen if you're careful. If you're burping the viscoelastic and cleaning it completely. I do a hydroimplantation, so my IOLs don't rotate as much. So on table, be very careful about your implantation axis. Make sure that you're neither over distending your chamber nor under distending it, or leaving visco behind. Then your IOLs are likely to be in place. So typically we would check 1 week post-op for outcomes, and we like to do an eye trace as well for torics, because it immediately tells us the axis of implantation. If we are off, it tells you can rotate by maybe 5, 10, 15 degrees. But for those who don't have it, you can still see it very easily and take a picture on the slit lamp with your smartphone and decide whether you want to do something about it. So I think that answers all the questions that I have here. Did I miss out on any questions?
There are a few in the chat as well.
So
some of them are repetitive,
Q&A.
but there are some new questions.
I think there are questions on the chat. Do we have more time, or should we close this session?
Sir, it's up to you, sir.
Do we have time to go on with a few more questions?
Sure, sir. Please go ahead.
There are some questions on the chat. Let me see. Okay. So I think most of these questions in the chat have also been put up in the Q&A. So I think most of them are already answered. Somebody has asked about the Kane formula. Now, see, that seems to be really exciting. It's a new formula which is coming up and is likely to do wonders. But I don't have any personal experience with that, so I will not be able to tell you more about the Kane formula. But I think I've been, I think all questions are answered and there is nothing left. So there is this feedback questionnaire, and please feel free to answer this. The duration of the webinar, was it adequate? Whether you agree or somewhat agree or disagree. I think we've gone on for almost 1.5 hours. I intended to finish it in 1 hour, 1 hour 15 minutes, but frankly, questions were nice. I was happy to answer them. And then we have a second question there on the content presented. Was it applicable to you? So please do answer these questions, because it will help the team design future webinars in a better. Of course, a lot of it could still be covered beyond this, but already the long enough, I remove biometry in special situations, which I'm sure can be covered by somebody else in a future lecture. Somebody has asked that whether combined A and B scan machines can be used for regular. Yes, you can, because the combined AB scan machines do have an A probe, and you can use that for taking. They're fully equipped. They have the IL formulas. We have one other than our regular A scan. We have a combined AB scan. So as a fallback, we have an A probe on that. It's a NIDEC AB scan. It has the option to do the IL-PAR calculation as well. So if you answered the questions, there are 3, 4, 5 questions. Please do answer all these questions, and that will help the Alcon team. I think the Alcon team is doing a great job. They are very professional with it, and they did send in to me quite a few possible areas to be covered. So I was able to cover those as well. So I would like to congratulate them on working really hard for making this event. And
thank you, sir. So thank you so much. I think we can end here, sir. Thank you
I
so
can't
much for your
hear,
time.
so let me see. Oh, so in between, I think I switched off my audio. I couldn't hear you guys because for one of the videos I had to put down the volume. So I hope I didn't miss anything from you guys on the
No, sir,
audio.
no, sir. So can you hear me now?
Yes, I can. Yes.
Great, sir. So thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much. It was a wonderful session. We've received some great feedback on the chat as well. Very, very informative, sir. And we will put up the recording on Alcon Experience Academy. So thank